Welcome to literary and jury charge practice. Let's get started. Ready? I can't think of a more important topic. Over the last few months and over the next few months, there have been and will be a number of conferences on this issue. I can assure you all of the other conferences resemble each other, and this one will be very different. It will have a very different point of view. We have had over the last decade or more a national debate on the issue of school quality, and there is a national consensus that we need to do a lot better. We are probably doing better than we used to, but we are not doing as well as other industrial countries, and in order to do well, we are going to have to do some of the things that those other countries are doing, such as develop high standards, assessments related to those standards, and a system of consequences so that teachers and youngsters and parents know that school counts. School makes a difference whether it's getting a job or getting into a college or getting into a training program. We are well on the way. It is going to take time, but we are on the way to bringing about the improvement that we need. But you can have a wonderful curriculum and terrific assessments, and you can state that there are consequences out there, but none of this is going to do much good in terms of providing youngsters with an education if we don't meet certain basic, obvious conditions, and those conditions are simply that you have to have schools that are safe and classrooms where there is sufficient order so that the curriculum means something. Without that, all of this stuff is nonsense. You can deliver a terrific curriculum, but if youngsters are throwing things, cursing and yelling, and punching each other, then the curriculum doesn't mean anything in that classroom. The agenda is quite different, and so we have a very interesting situation. We have members of Congress and governors and state legislatures talking about choice and vouchers and charter schools, and you know what the big incentive is for those issues. Parents are not really pushing for these things except in conditions where their children seem to be unsafe or in conditions where they can't learn, and then they say, well, look, if you can't straighten things out here, then give me a chance to take my youngster somewhere else. All right, a little jury charge practice. Here we go. When you are denied any of these and other constitutional rights, you are deprived of due process of the law, and your conviction cannot stand. The criminal justice system is the least stable of all the areas of law. It is a continuous state of change. The United States Supreme Court interprets the law. It shifts from time to time in its interpretations due to changes in society. It has shifted from protecting the rights of the individual accused of a crime to expanding the powers of the police in the interest of public safety. Proponents of this shift contend that the judicial system has long been too lenient with criminals and feel that it is about time the courts did something to crack down on crime. On the other hand, some have criticized this trend on the basis that the Constitution is designed to protect the individual from unfair, abusive government intrusion. The pendulum swings back and forth on these various issues. The abortion issue is one such issue. Also, the political party that is in office often dominates how the law will be interpreted. Supreme Court justices are selected by the current president. The justice must be confirmed by the Senate. Just as an attorney will seek jurors who will look favorably on his or her case, the president will look for someone who will support his or her ideals. Police cannot perform unlawful searches. The Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution protects citizens against unreasonable searches and seizures. To get a search warrant, the police must apply to a judge. The judge will issue a warrant only if the police presents sufficient testimony and affidavits to establish probable cause that contraband or evidence of a crime will be found. The warrant must carefully describe the person or premises in question, as well as the type of evidence sought during the search. The police must stay within the scope of the warrant. There are times in which the police can make a search without first obtaining a warrant. If you consent to the search, a warrant is not required, but even when you permit a search, the police must stay within the bounds of your consent and must also search only those areas where the object could physically be concealed. Police do not need a search warrant when the object is in plain view. If a gun or packet of cocaine is lying uncovered on the seat of a car parked on a public street, no warrant is necessary. All right, let's get back to our Democratic National Convention article. Ready? Obama signs littered the convention floor following his keynote speech when he was a mere state senator in the Illinois legislature. We met a delegate who had been attending conventions for 50 years. We were so exhausted at the end of the week that we couldn't fathom being involved for that length of time. 2008, Denver, Pepsi Center, Invesco Field, Barack Obama, Joe Biden. The first African American presidential candidate was nominated. Everyone was informed the day, as many people as possible, so we were going to have the nominating speeches outdoors at Invesco Field. This presented a nightmare for everyone from media to production and on down. We transitioned to a trailer with prime field access, including Sheryl Crow's powerful performance. Oprah made an appearance. If Fitbits were in vogue then, Amy would have logged more than 3 times her 10,000 steps retrieving our speeches. We had smartphones, a gigantic progressive technological breakthrough. We took turns sitting in seats during the nominating speech and were able to witness the thrill firsthand. The security perimeter was miles from the actual Pepsi Center. We waited in long lines, necessitating very early arrivals and long days. Our support staff dwindled to 3. History was made, and we were excited to be part of it. All right, let's get back to some jury charge material. Ready? When you are lawfully arrested, you can be searched without your consent. A police officer cannot single your car out for no reason and search it. You are not guilty of possession unless you know that what you had was a drug. Growing marijuana plants is a crime, the severity of which often depends on how many plants are growing. If, for instance, there are a number of plants, the assumption made is that the person is selling to others. Therefore, he or she may be charged with a felony. The crime of battery is defined as the offensive touching of someone else without his or her consent. Although battery is thought of as a violent act, a light brush of the hand can be battery. The crime is the deliberate confinement without his or her consent or without legal jurisdiction. Confinement can be physical, such as putting the victim into a room or cell and locking the door. It can also be just a threatening to do something to the victim if he or she tries to leave. A person is kidnapped when he or she is moved from one place to another against his or her will. If a demand is made for payment, the punishment for the crime is usually increased. Another crime committed to a person is mayhem. Mayhem is the deliberate act of maiming a person or causing permanent disfigurement. Homicide is the killing of one human being by another human being. All right, a little more practice. And so we are about to be in a situation. We behave, we believe we can go someplace and be safe, and we are going to leave the 2% who are violent and disruptive to take over the schools. Now, isn't it ridiculous to move 98% of the kids when all you have to do is move 2 or 3% of them, and the other 98% would be absolutely fine? Now, this is a problem which has a number of aspects, and I want to talk about them. First, there is, of course, the problem of extreme danger, where we are dealing with violence or guns or drugs within the school. And as we look to the schools, what we find is that the schools seem to be unable to handle this. We had headlines here in DC just a week ago saying that the mayor and school officials say they don't know what else to do. In other words, they have done everything that they can, and the guns and the knives and the drugs are still there. So it just happens that they have actually said it, but that is how many school administrators and school boards across the country believe. They treat violence as a fact of life. That's what society is like, and they just go through a couple of ritual efforts to try to show that they are doing something, but basically they have given up. Now, of course, the violence and the drugs have to be distinguished from another type of activity. This other type isn't deadly in the sense that you are going to read tomorrow morning that some youngster was stabbed or shot, and that is the whole question of just plain out and out disruption. The youngster who is constantly yelling, cursing, jumping, fighting, and doing all sorts of things so that most of the time the other students in the class and the teacher are not devoted not to the academic mission of the schools, but to figuring out how to contain this individual. Occasionally, youngsters are suspended or removed for periods of time. The reason that we have these high levels of violence and disruption has to do with lessons that the youngsters learn. All right, back to a little jury charge. Ready? After a defendant pleads guilty to the crime, or the jury finds the defendant guilty, the judge will impose the defendant's punishment or sentence. Ordinarily, it consists of time in jail, payment of a fine, or both. Sometimes the judge will order a defendant to make restitution to the victim. The person may be required to return stolen property, for instance, or pay the victim what it takes to repair any damaged property. The person may be required to perform community service activities depending upon the crime. The punishment for a crime must be equal to the crime. It cannot be excessive for the crime. It cannot violate the constitutional safeguard against cruel and unusual punishment. Punishment must be equal to the crime. If it is not, it is considered cruel and unusual. When it is so unequal to the crime that it shocks the conscience and offends fundamental notions of human dignity, it is considered cruel and unusual. Punishment that is barbaric violates the guarantee against cruel and unusual punishment. At one time in this country, capital punishment was an accepted and frequently imposed sentence. Many criminals were put to death for crimes that today are not considered serious enough to justify the death penalty. During a latter period, the death penalty was absolutely prohibited. In the 1970s, the United States Supreme Court reinstated the death penalty for some murders. Advocates of the death penalty contend that it deters criminals from committing serious crimes, but capital punishment has a deterrence to crime. As a part of the sentence, the defendant may be put on probation for a length of time. A criminal sentenced to prison may be granted a parole before serving out the whole term of his or her prison sentence. A parole is essentially the same as probation. The difference between a parole and probation is that probation is granted at the time of sentencing, while parole is granted after the person has served time in prison. Like probation, parole serves the same two objectives. It is designed to help rehabilitate the convict by reintegrating him or her into society. It is also designed to prevent prisoners from being overcrowded. Parole has another objective as well. It gives prison inmates an incentive for good behavior in prison, since the better their conduct, the earlier they can be released. All right, that will conclude our literary and jury charge practice.